Hello and welcome to a Tippling Philosopher with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and my esteemed guest, Emerson Green. We cut it a bit closer, a bit of a close shave, unlike my face. Anyway, this is basically padding whilst the adverts play out, and no one can actually hear this anyway live. But
really?
Probably that's why people have 30-second countdowns. But anyway, Emerson, thank you so much for turning up and joining in the ensuing fun. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about quote unquote the dumbest thing that some people have ever read, which is
This is
how
on
some
the
people characterize the argument that we made the other day.
yeah. I'll come to that in a second because I was like, yeah, I'll come to that in a second. I just for the people on the live chat, thank you for turning up. Mitch Mazzaroli, and I do apologise if I butchered your name. Gets a virtual clap on the back, so thank you for being the first to the live chat. And I said I'll give you something, and that was it. So I hope you're happy. Brilliant. So Emerson has been on this on my channel before, and we had a really great talk about atheism, general arguments, and we talked about abduction as a form of logical, as an approach to making arguments, specifically concerning atheism and the rationale that it's more probable that God doesn't exist. So we will start our chat off with that today. But before we get there, Emerson, thank you again. I'm going to thank you for coming on again, and I'm going to just talk about you. You did the whole introduction. We talked about you and your life before. I'm going to just share, hopefully, the screen to show where people can find you. Talk us through what you do and, what you spend probably far too much of your life banging on about.
Oh yeah, definitely too much time. But you can find me at Walden Pod on Twitter, and I've got a link tree there, and I've got a link tree on YouTube as well, just Emerson Green on YouTube. And yeah, you can find everything there. But I've got the Emerson Green YouTube channel where I post my podcasts. So I started Counter Apologetics a few years ago, and a little while later I started Walden Pod. So the first one is just about philosophy of religion. The other one is about most of my other interests, usually metaphysics of consciousness, sometimes other stuff. But yeah, it's most of it ends up on the YouTube channel. It's kind of decentralized, but that's the way I like it. But yeah, I talk about religion and consciousness and sometimes some other stuff.
What I really love about your content is that you basically put a transcript of your of your podcasts as blog pieces, and that's really phenomenally useful for me when I'm writing pieces, because we have such a crossover of interests that I find that recently I've been like, I used your what we'll be talking about today, Meager Moral Fruits piece, which is a transcript of your video, to help just construct my own piece on the subject, because it's something that I find really interesting, especially having just read Phil Zuckerman, who's a sociologist of religion, and interviewed him. And we'll talk about this later, because you can bring into bear a lot of these sort of empirical evidences to support the what is an abductive argument, the Meager Moral Fruits.
And that's why I'm so inarticulate in these sorts of things, because I script out everything that I say in those podcasts. Like I write it out pretty carefully, and then I try to make it sound like I'm just having a conversation with you. But then when I actually get in something like this, then people comment on the difference sometimes. I got a really funny message a couple months ago that was like, Emerson, I love your podcast, but when you say like and it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. I do have all these vocal tics that I don't really pick up on until I'm doing this, and then I'm like whatever every 5 seconds, and it's really unfortunate.
Well, deal with it. basically, viewer, deal with it, jog on or enjoy. Those are the only two options, basically. So I wrote a piece on the meager moral fruits argument, and bear in mind we haven't explained what that is yet. And I produced an article on Only Sky, and then you, because I referenced your transcript, your article, your pod, you then shared that on Twitter, and then someone on Twitter was like, "This is the dumbest argument." I mean, I forget exactly what they said.
It's someone who I've encountered many times, and who kind of me and my little friend group have just so many running jokes about, because there are a handful of just these psycho Catholic traditionalists on Twitter. Like, I have Catholic friends, and they're normal, but then there are these people where they make Mel Gibson look moderate or something. But there's one of these people, like, quote tweeted and said, like, this is a terrible argument. And then the thing that he was mainly upset about was that you referenced racism. You used racism as an example for things, and I used LGBT stuff as an example for things. And that's mainly what he seemed upset about. Didn't really interact with the substance of the argument too much, but in all of his replies, like the replies from his fans and followers were really interesting to me. Like, they were throwing around the word sodomite, which is not something I realized people were doing in this century. But yeah, they were just like, it was an interesting response, because I have to admit, I used that LGBT example over and over again for a couple reasons. One of them is just that it's a really solid empirical claim to say that Christianity has been an obstacle to LGBT equality. It's pretty easy to substantiate that, whereas some meager moral fruits arguments make empirical claims that are hard to substantiate. But also, like I said, I have to admit something, which is that it was kind of bait. Like, I was kind of baiting Christians into what I thought they would do, which was something like, oh, it's complicated. We need to love our gay brothers and sisters, but sometimes we have to lean on the church's teachings instead of our own understanding. Like, I was thinking,
we don't hate the sinner, we hate the sin.
Yeah, I was thinking that they would have to reaffirm their kind of anti-gay positions. I did not expect the response that it got in some quarters, which was, Christians are better because we oppose the sodomites, which is like, verbatim. I'm not strawmanning there. Like, so it was more than I expected.
So that when I wrote my article on the meager moral fruits argument, I actually didn't go down the LGBT route that you did, and I chose racism, and then talked about other more generic pro-social behaviors, such as kindness and so on and so forth. But I chose racism because I thought that is actually less controversial. I think most humans, although they may actually be racist, they don't openly claim to be racist, right? And so therefore they say racism is bad. I mean, most people appear to agree that racism is bad. And then I produced the empirical evidence that suggests that within America, the more Christian you are, the more likely you are to be racist, and therefore, and that seemed to be A, pretty decent empirical evidence, and B, everyone would agree that racism is bad. And so therefore, I didn't want to do that as baity as you did, but it's still fairly evocative and emotive.
Yeah, I mean, for my thing, I was just thinking that, most of the audience, I think, especially as time goes on, including Christian audiences, like, this is increasingly common ground, because, like, ideally the argument will appeal to morals that are like shared ground between Christians and non-Christians. That would make the argument work best. If you just appeal to things that they don't even think are moral, or if they appeal to things that we don't think are moral, like tithing or something, or worshiping God, then it doesn't really progress anything, because in order to have a dialogue, you do need some common ground. So the thing is, the LGBT stuff is increasingly common ground with young Christians. It's actually pretty surprising.
Yeah, and well, okay, absolutely, and we'll talk about all the different sort of, not iterations, but all the different ways of measuring, I suppose, morality in a second. But before we do that, let's lay the groundwork by talking a little bit about logic and about what is induction. And I know we did this last time, but just for the audience again, what is deduction, induction, and abduction? Thank you very much, Ricky Johnson. my channel has become one of my favorites. Fascinating discussions. That's awesome. Thank you, Ricky. Really, really generous of you to say so. Please check out Emerson's if you haven't already. His is a superb channel. So let's talk about what is deduction, what is induction, and what is abduction, and why is this argument that we're going to talk about abductive, or at least, you know, what do abductive arguments, what's the benefit of abductive arguments?
So a deductive argument is one where the conclusion follows inescapably from the premises. So, you know, if you see like a syllogism, it's usually deductive, like when people give examples. So, yeah, I mean, you know, standard deductive argument, you know, if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. And then the conclusion just follows inescapably from the premises. Induction is, you know, more probabilistic. It's not like...
So let's just give an example, sorry, of deduction. So
Yeah.
the famous example, it can go either way, this, but all men are mortals. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Or
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that you'll see.
Yeah. So.
And induction is more probabilistic, you know, like it just kind of raises the probability or makes something more likely than not. So Richard Swinburne, in his organization, he'll have C inductive arguments, which sort of raise the probability of a conclusion, and he has P inductive arguments, which make the conclusion more likely than not. A while ago, I read a paper by Timothy Perrin and Stephen J. Weikstra that had the term abductive atheology in the title. I can't remember the whole title, but they talk about this sort of abductive approach. And abduction, as I understand it, is like a subspecies of induction.
Yeah.
So the way that they spelled it out in that paper, like, hey, this is what Paul Draper is doing. You know, this is kind of the approach that's emerged. So ever since then, I've sort of, you know, adopted that label for myself, where it's like, yeah, abductive atheology, that's what I'm doing.
So this is to say that we're dealing more with probability rather than, as you say, inescapably leading to a conclusion. An inductive argument might be something like, all swans I've ever seen have been white, therefore the next one I see will be white, or something like
will
that.
Probably be white.
Will probably be white. And that's inductive, but you know, it's not a surefire conclusion. So you know, in days gone past, it would have been all swans are white, therefore the next one I will see will be white. But then we found black swans in Australia, and it's like, you know, Hume, this was a problem of induction, so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, so, but this is a probabilistic argument. Abduction is, as you say, connected to that, because it is talking about probability. So, and it's often defined as the inference to the best explanation.
Yeah. So that's that's what you'll find in that paper, as I recall it. So it's like, again, the some of the like more nerdy philosophical stuff for people who might not be interested in that. The bottom line is that the conclusion is that God probably doesn't exist if you're taking this kind of approach. But abduction, the way that they describe it in that paper, they use the terms explanatory and contrastive. So it's explanatory in the sense that we're talking about an inference to the best explanation, you know, like explanatory fit. What is the best explanation we have of the data that we see? Because many explanations are logically consistent with our observations, but you know, we want the explanation that sort of best predicts the world as we know it. It's also contrastive in that we're comparing two different theories. So that kind of anticipates some objections that people have to this approach. But basically, we're like comparing theism and naturalism and asking which is a better explanation. You know, a better explanation in the sense that the observations that we're seeing are more likely to be found in a naturalistic world than in a theistic world. So, I mean, hang on, I'm looking at this question now.
Well, yeah. So, Mitch, because we're geeky types and philosophers, we're this is all preamble. So we haven't even described the argument yet. But hang on a second. So abductive arguments end up being cumulative often by adding them together and say, well, look, if given this piece of data, say evolution, right, the abductive argument would be that what is more likely given evolution. So is theism more likely, or is atheism more likely? And then you say, well, given this, atheism was more likely, right? Given like the nature of evolution. It's not impossible under theism, but it's more likely. Okay.
Right.
So then you look at something else and say, what's more likely given this? And what's more likely given this? And when you start putting all these things together, so Paul Draper, as you mentioned before, talked about having a jar with different like colored pills in. So you got red or jelly beans. You've got red jelly beans and blue jelly beans. Let's say that blue jelly beans are arguments that support atheism.
Or lines of evidence that would support.
Lines of evidence that would support atheism, and red jelly beans are lines of evidence that support theism, right? And say you have, like, in one jar, you've got overwhelming amounts of red beans and a few blue beans, and another jar you've got overwhelming numbers of blue beans and a few red beans, and some yellow ones which are neutral, right? So the idea is that when you keep picking out these arguments, when you keep coming across data that better supports atheism, then what jar is more likely to be a better reflection of reality, or what jar is more likely to be reality?
Yeah,
So
which jar are we most likely pulling from? You know, if we keep pulling like one colored bean over, like we keep pulling jelly beans from a jar, we don't know which one we're pulling from. But then when we look at it, we've got way more red beans, just a handful of blue beans and a handful of yellow beans, or a lot of yellow beans. Those are neutral again. Then it's just, you know, we can just kind of infer that we've been pulling from the one that has more red beans, as opposed to the one which has, you know, because both of these jars have red beans, blue beans, and yellow beans. So, you know, again, it doesn't conclusively prove we've been pulling from the one jar. It's just more likely that we're pulling from the jar with more red beans.
So the idea, so what will be presented today is that this is another argument out of many that suggests that we are pulling from the jar of atheism as opposed to theism.
Yeah.
So so thank you very much to Mitch. 10 Canadian dollars is very, very generous. Really, really appreciate it. FY, the E following the LL is silent. So is it Mazzarol? Or is it Mazzarol? Okay, but I won't pronounce the E next time. I do apologize. We'll get there by like the sixth next video.
And I just want to plant a flag for the nerds out there who I don't want to get too hung up on this classificatory stuff about like induction and abduction, but if my understanding is imperfect, then please correct me. You know, like this is just stuff I've picked up from. It's not like this is just stuff I've picked up from reading philosophy of religion papers and that sort of thing. So as far as I understand it, abduction is a type of induction. You know, when Paul Draper is making his case, I think he refers to it as inductive. Swinburne refers to his case as abductive, or inductive rather. Yeah, you can frame these things different ways. You know, you can take the same argument and kind of express it in a different logical form. But yeah, I would just recommend that paper by Perrin andWijkstra to get a good explanation of abductive atheology. And I think, and those two are Christians as well. So, I mean, like there's a lot of, you know, friendly debate and kind of explaining each other's views in a way that, you know, I'm so happy with that. I like reference the paper. I'm like, hey, look at these Christians explain what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Canadian Catholic, for joining in the fun. I am morphing into Sherlock Holmes villain. I'd like to say actually Sherlock Holmes. But, you know, take your pick. Depends where you think I sit on the moral spectrum, I suppose. I think I sit on the nice side, but, you know, I could be wrong. What is the Meager moral fruits argument? Now that we're 18 minutes in.
Right. Okay, so yeah, I mean, that wasn't all pointless preamble because the Meager moral fruits argument does fit into this scheme that we've been talking about looking at the world and saying, you know, what should we expect the world to look like if Christianity were true? And what would we expect the world to look like if naturalism were true? So this is one of those, you know, red beans like that we drew from the jar that's like more consistent with the naturalistic jar than the Christian jar. So, you know, many who have left the Christian faith have done so because Christianity was not enabling them to pursue the good for themselves and for others. There's actually, you know, a good amount of data backing that up. And this is kind of surprising on Christianity. The way that Paul Draper formulates this argument, he's the one who sort of named the Meager moral fruits argument. I actually don't much like his version of the argument. He doesn't like his version of the argument either, which is kind of why I wanted to make this episode about it, where we would kind of maybe try some new versions of the argument and give people the tools to experiment with it and make their own. But we can sort of take it as the empirical claim that Christians and non-Christians are kind of the same. Like, you can't really tell. Like, it's not like Christians all have this like, reputation that really distinguishes them from non-Christians. Like if I say something like Mr. Rogers was a nice guy, everyone just kind of knows that's the case. And the basic claim is that if Christianity were true, then Christians as a group would just kind of have the reputation of being more moral than other people. Not that it would be the most easily quantifiable thing in the world, but it would just kind of be a judgment that everyone made. Everyone kind of knew it was true. Oh yeah, Christians are kind of better people than everyone else. The reason that we would expect that is because built into Christianity are all these theological claims about the transformative power of Christ, the power of the Holy Spirit, the fact that, goodness, the good itself and God are kind of bound up in this metaphysical way. And if people are cutting themselves off from that, then you would expect some kind of difference. So the fact that many people are leaving Christianity because Christianity is proving to be an obstacle to the good is surprising on Christianity's, self-image. But on naturalism, Christianity is a human institution, and like all other human institutions, it would be sometimes an aid and sometimes an obstacle to the pursuit of the good. So that is what we observe. It's a mixed bag, and naturalism predicts a mixed bag, whereas Christianity gives us reason to expect that Christians and Christian institutions would be so noticeably different from everyone else because, again, the transformative power of Christ, the fruits of the Spirit, the fact that we're all just acting according to the flesh, but they also are acting according to the Spirit. Like there really are good scriptural and traditional reasons to suppose that Christians should be noticeably different from non-Christians. It is absolutely not the case that naturalism and Christian theism make exactly the same predictions about what Christians would be like.
It's the nature of the fundamental nature of morality within philosophy. So it's almost as if every argument you talk about in philosophy only devolves down to morality eventually, because morality is the only kind of argument that matters. There's a certain amount of mattering that goes on with morality. Whereas, I could talk about the ontology of the universe, right? So do we live in an idealistic universe where everything is mental matter, it's a mental construct? Or do we live in a material universe? And you could just say, well, it doesn't really matter. Like unless that affects me in some kind of tangible way, and by affecting me, it really has to be a kind of moral effect. It only seems to be that morality is. It seems to be that only morality really kind of matters in philosophy, which is why politics is so important, and why when we look at different religious sects and different religions as a whole, they are predominantly frameworks of moral philosophy. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I don't know about. I mean, are you saying that like it all? I'm not exactly sure what you're claiming, but I mean, the parts that I understood made sense to me.
Well, it's like the idea that when we're talking about religion, so it's the idea that should someone from a religion really be a better moral agent, and it's the idea, well, if a religion's going to matter, if being a part of a religion is going to matter, then the only way it really matters is in terms of morality, because that's the only kind of area of the whole of existence and philosophy that matters. I'd say my personal opinion is morality matters, and everything else is interesting, and the truth of which is interesting only either in passing or in the way it pertains to eventual moral claims and morality. So that's kind of when you're looking at a religion, you would expect people of that religion to say, my religion matters, right? It matters to be a member of my religious organization, my religion. But why does it matter? Who cares, right? Well, it's only going to matter in terms of a selfish kind of like, it's going to get me to heaven or it will get me to avoid hell. But how do I do that? By being good, or like it's either going to be about just blind faith or faith that's going to get me to heaven and get me to avoid hell. Well, that seems kind of like, well, what's the point of believing, unless on its own, it doesn't seem to matter that much. Okay, that moral kind of side paradigm seems to be something to me that would be more meaningful in terms of, I don't know, adhering to a religion. I don't know.
I mean, ideally, you wouldn't want to be a member of a religion just for soteriological concerns, to try to avoid some kind of punishment. But it's interesting that when you bring up universalism, there are some people who, seem to think that, well, what's even the point of being a Christian? It's like, well, I think that there's more to like being a Christian than just like avoiding hell. It's kind of a strange question. And to answer Canadian Catholics' question, I'm 6 foot, but like just barely. I mean, like I'm like 6 foot 0.00000. Like I'm just barely 6 foot.
He's asked that on a poll before on his YouTube channel, so I wonder if he's trying to make a correlation between like height and moral position or height and belief. But I don't know. Thanks anyway, CC. There's your answer. I am about 6 foot. I didn't realize that you were that tall. You don't. Maybe it's because there's that gap above your head.
I'm always sitting down in these videos, but yeah.
There you go.
But I will say though, it's completely unfair. I'm the oldest in my family. I'm the oldest sibling, and both of my younger brothers are significantly taller than me. Like I'm like the shortest male in my family. My dad is like 6'7". My brother's 6'4". My other brother's 6'3". So I look really short compared to. I'm like, no, they're just giraffes. I'm normal height.
Why? Yeah. Why you said that's unfair? You're putting a value judgment on height. That's
it's not fair to be the oldest and the shortest. This is why I'm an atheist.
So when you talk about the Meager moral fruits argument, you talk about there being three premises which you've set out here: the theological premise, the empirical premise, and the moral premise. Should I read them out?
I mean, I can't really read that on my screen, but I think I know it well enough. Like a theological premise, these are features of most Meager moral fruits arguments, at least as I'm interested in them. So there's a claim that's sort of built into the theology of the religion about, the behavior of its adherents. There's an empirical premise about, just the way the world is, some descriptive fact, and then some moral premise, often about, some normative judgment. But yeah, you can go through those where I said it more carefully if you like.
Yeah, so the theological premise, roughly speaking, you say, is the claim that Christianity should bear moral fruits. So that's what we've been talking about at the moment. For example, Christianity should be an aid to the pursuit of the good for oneself and for others, and not an obstacle. So you should expect Christians, for example, or any religious sect or group of people to be more moral, or at least that their religion, if they believe it's true or if it is true, should act as an aid towards gaining moral goodness. Okay, so that's the theological premise. Then you have the empirical premise, which is meant to establish some relevant fact about the world. For example, Christianity has historically been an obstacle to LGBT equality, is the example you gave, but you could use any example there. So you should say that Christianity has been an aid to pro-social behavior, kindness, giving to charity, has been an obstacle to racism, right? These are empirical premises that we would need to look at given the theological premise that we've already set out. And then you have the moral premise, which is talking about the basis of the empirical premise, which is affirms a moral fact or normative judgment. For example, LGBT equality would be a moral good. Racism is a moral bad. Kindness is good. So therefore, it might depend on what behavior you're talking about as to where you go with the argument. So there could be argument from certain Christian sources saying, well, actually, LGBT equality isn't good because actually that's a moral sin. And so we get into the long grass and the weeds of like arguing over whether that is actually a good thing. So what I said in my argument was I used racism as an example for the reasons I said earlier, which seems to be more universally accepted that racism is bad. Or you can talk about generalized pro-social behavior, kindness to strangers, giving to charity, and all these sort of things that everyone generally agrees are morally good.
Yeah, and I mean, for what it's worth, when I was talking about LGBT equality, all I meant was, sort of legal and social equality, such that we don't have different laws for gay people and straight people. Like, I think that's actually pretty non-controversial, and I think it'll only get more and more widely accepted. But there's a lot more.
No, I think it would depend on the type of, for example, Christian or Muslim or whoever you're talking about. Because I would say that some would say that actually they shouldn't be afforded because it's a moral harm.
Yeah, no, I just mean like, as just in the general population of like the US, for instance, like I think it is getting more widely accepted, even among Christians and Muslims,
Yeah.
that we just shouldn't have separate laws for gay people and straight people. It seems kind of obvious when you put it that way. But I recognize there's a lot more controversial stuff going on, that's LGBT related, but I'm not really thinking of that. I'm just thinking of like basic legal equality, which Christianity was, undeniably an obstacle to.
Yeah, and so what this argument, those three things together, form the thought processes that go into saying that we would expect. Let's use Christianity here as our example, but actually you could even be more exact. So you could say Southern Baptist, and then you could be like this particular type of Southern Baptist. They believe that their sect is the most true version of Christianity, then you would expect those to be far more moral, significantly more morally good than people outside of that sect, even if they're fellow Christians.
Well, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't expect false religions and true religions to produce the same kinds of adherents. Like, when people try to deny the theological premise, it sounds like that's what they're saying. They're saying there should be no difference. Apparently Jesus offers no transformational power. The influence of the Spirit has zero tangible effect. And cutting yourself off from the foundation and source of goodness itself produces no results whatsoever. Like, that's what you have to believe to deny the theological premise. And I think it's ridiculous. I think that true religions should produce different effects than false religions. But Christians will often, kind of reflexively deny the theological premise. They make pretty bold claims in this realm until they start hearing an argument like this. And they're like, oh, actually, we're all sinners and we're all depraved. And would I even expect, any difference at all? It's like, some of you say that atheists can't even be moral, but then when we get to this conversation, suddenly they start backpedaling.
Well, yeah, when you start presenting the data, and we'll talk about the data in a little bit. But what when you present this, as you've presented this directly to Christians more than I have, your experience, and I know you've talked about it already, of those three premises, what are the ones that get attacked the most, and how?
Among Christians, like I said, they kind of reflexively deny the theological premise, at least at first, but that's just totally untenable in light of scripture and tradition.
Do you think they do that because if they accept it, then it leads inexorably to the conclusion that you hold? Do you think they deny it not out of rational reasons for denying it, but because they need to deny it?
Yeah, I mean, it puts a burden on them to be, better than everyone else, which is kind of a big lift, and it's obviously not the case. And I think once they've been sort of made aware that, like, oh, this is evidence against Christianity, then there's kind of this natural resistance to it. But I will say, because some people question this whole idea that, like, if Christians were better, that would be evidence for Christianity. But like I said, I feel like once you interrogate that, it just becomes so obvious that true religions and false religions shouldn't produce the same effects. That if you really believe in that you were new creatures in Christ, eventually you're going to have to explain what that means. If you don't think that there's any tangible difference, I mean, like, this is not some like elaborate ad hominem attack. Like, these theories about the world make certain predictions about its adherents, and those predictions are clearly not being borne out. So yeah, I mean, I think that that the basis of this argument, which is the theological premise, like, that is what people kind of, at least Christians, reflexively react against. But like I said, I just don't think that's tenable. And something I've noticed among atheists is they're a lot more likely to question the empirical premise, kind of following Paul Draper. As I mentioned, Paul Draper made, as far as I know, like, the original, like, he named this argument. That's why I'm still calling it, like, the Meager moral fruits argument. So he doesn't even like his original formulation of it, and I don't like it either, because I think he makes these empirical claims that are just way too bold, like about theists and atheists on average. Like the way that he phrases it, it's basically like this sociological claim that would be very hard to substantiate. And I'm like, well, why don't you just make different make like so here's the core of the argument, a theological premise, an empirical premise, and a moral premise. It doesn't have to be the specific ones that Draper made. So yeah, I think that atheists kind of following Draper often reject the argument on the basis of the empirical premise and say, oh, this is too hard to actually quantify and show, and like, yeah, obviously, like, you can't like quantify virtue on like a scale from 0 to 10 or something like that. It just doesn't work like that. So you have to find some other way of making empirical claims that can actually be, substantiated. And I think that can be done.
So I've interviewed Phil Zuckerman, who's a sociologist of religion, very prominent one, written some excellent books. He wrote What It Means to Be Moral, and he also wrote The Non-Religious with Luke Galen and forget his first name, Pasquale.
Shout out to Reasonable Doubts.
Reasonable Doubts podcast. I've said before, the greatest podcast I've made. And again, you, Emerson, you're a fan of that podcast. It's just my estimation of you.
That's where I get the name from, Counter Apologetics. That was Jeremy's segment. Yeah. So
Jeremy Bean, who wrote the foreword to my book, Beyond an Absence of Faith. There, Jeremy Bean. He was the there you go. Anyway, whatever. Luke Galen on there did the Thinking Like God segment, which was a psychology of religion, and his segments are always brilliant. That talked a lot about this, and in the book The Non-Religious by it's around somewhere by Phil Zuckerman, the whole book is basically the whole data, all the data analyses for these kind of questions, which is what are non-religious people generally more like, politically, morally, socially, and all these different dimensions, like depression, suicide, like a whole kind of string of different like behaviors, and what are theists more generally like. And it's a very complex picture. There are whole loads of variables, and as you're right in saying, Emerson, that it is difficult to unpick some of these things, but you look for like generalizations, and you find that actually it is a mixed bag, but in very meaningful ways. Certainly on some of those progressive features you're talking about, LGBT and all these more progressive ideals, atheists come out and the non-religious come out far better than the theists, and those ones are easy wins for in this the context of this argument for the non-religious.
Yeah, and like I said, it's best to pick things that are common ground, but I think to the chagrin of a lot of believers, these things are increasingly common ground. Do you mind if I get a glass of water? I forgot to grab one before we started.
Yeah. I'm just going to talk about the racism thing that I mentioned earlier, which is in my article on the Meager Moral Fruits on Only Sky, I talked about how, and this is based on a book that came out last year by a chap called Johnson, I think, or is it Jones? I'll find it in a second. Talked about how the more religious you are in America, it turns out, particularly white religious, the more likely you are to be racist or accept racist views, and loads of data to support this. And therefore, the more non-religious you are, the less likely you are to be racist and hold racist views. And this is really problematic because you would expect a big old kind of obvious moral sector like this to be, if say Christianity is the correct religion, you would not expect Christians to be more morally horrible in terms of racist. You would not expect them to be more racist than non-religious people. That would be a bizarre state of affairs, given that this religion is supposedly correct and true, and therefore you have to explain that. Well, why would God create the world in such a way that his his adherents happen to be more morally worse than the non-adherents? Why is it that Christians in America are generally, and quite significantly more racist? And the more, interestingly, the more they go to church, the more racist they are. So the stats are really, really very interesting, and it is not good for Christians, for white Christians. Obviously, black Christians in this paradigm, in this context, are kind of a different kettle of fish. So yeah, I talked a lot about racism, but as Emerson said, we can talk more generally even about pro-social behavior, and I've done a whole video on exactly that, but we're going to dip into that in a second. I don't know if you heard much of that, but do you agree?
I did. I completely agree. I didn't hear 90% of it, but I'm sure it was wonderful.
I'll tell you, it definitely was. So when we're talking about moral behavior in terms of your more generalized pro-social behavior, it gets tricky. So if you take something like charity, giving to charity, Christians in America give more to charity than non-religious people. So the headline there is, here's something that suggests Christianity is this argument favors Christianity. But then the devil's in the details. So a lot of this is based on self-selection biases with data where people are presenting themselves as being X, not actually giving hard data, but it's like subjective. Oh yeah, I'm kind and I do this and I give it, yeah. But is that actually true? Do they feel they have to say it given the nature? Like I'm Christian, so I feel I have to say that. So there are, when it comes to moral and happiness, social scientific pieces of research, these are quite problematic areas. But when it comes to charity, it gets even more difficult, because it turns out that Christians, for example, are far more likely to give to charities that are in their own in-group, that are, for example, included in this is tithing to their church. So giving money each week to their church is then lumped in with charity. And yeah, we give more money to charity. It turns out that an awful lot of that is going to their own organization and establishment. That's like, if atheists suddenly gave way more money than theist charity, but all their charity was like American atheists, then how would Christians feel about that in terms of our kindness and charitable giving?
Yeah, I mean, like if you give money, or if you gave money to Mother Teresa, then that would count as charitable giving, and she's not spending that money on the poor. Like, to the extent that she was, tending to the poor, what she would offer them was not really any aid or any any serious help that you would expect someone who wants to work with the poor to offer. But yeah, I mean, she was like a missionary. So yeah, if atheists gave money to American atheists, like would that be fair game? Giving money to Mother Teresa to evangelize, is that charitable giving? I mean, like, I don't really think that should count.
And then you look at things like the famous sort of memes you can see about the starving Haitian child, and it's like, oh yeah, give them Bibles. The idea that Haiti received an awful lot of religious charity, but that came in the form of sending out Bibles and sending out missionaries.
Yeah,
so that
not just that. There's also, I mean, I don't want to disparage like charities, even like Christian charities who do good work and actually do help people. Like, I have a Christian friend, and he's not Christian, his broader family's Christian. They adopted a child from Haiti after the earthquake. So, I don't mean to say it's all bad. I'm just saying that, as you're pointing out, a lot of this stuff gets lumped in under giving to charity, and it's not exactly common ground. It's sort of in the same category as like worshiping God or something.
Yeah, so it turns out that the more religious you are in America, and there's interesting issues with this, is how do you measure religiosity? Is it attending church? Is it some more abstract idea that you're more religious if you believe X, Y, Z, or you spend more time thinking about these things? How do you measure religiosity? But given that, it turns out that the higher your religiosity, the more you are likely to favor the in-group, and the less likely, in fact, the more likely you are to be aggressive to the out-group. So it's not just about, hey, I'm nice to people who are like me, but I'm actually aggressive to people who are unlike me. And it turns out that the more religious you are, the less universal your morality is, and the more in-group your morality is, and the more non-religious you are, the more universal your morality is. Which, if you look at Jesus and the parable of the Good Samaritan, that what the data suggests is that Christians generally, the more moral they are, the more they are breaking Jesus's parable.
Yeah, I mean, what else is new? I mean, like, Jesus pretty clearly didn't want people to have great personal wealth. Like, he didn't want people to be rich. And I'm literally not sure that he could have made that fact clearer. Like, I actually don't know what he could have said that would have made it clearer, but Christians still don't care about that. But, you bring up a good point, though, about the, going to church, or like what makes someone a Christian? Because another common response I hear to this argument is sort of a no true Christian type thing. Like, oh, well, some Christians are, exceptionally good people, which is, of course, true, just as there are many atheists who are exceptionally good people. There are good people and bad people in all cohorts here. So Christians will sometimes respond, though, and say, like, those are the real Christians, the ones who, you actually can know they're Christians by their love. And all the other ones are just kind of like not real Christians, I guess, or maybe they won't make it that strong, but they'll bring up this whole problem of like, hey, lots of people claim to be Christian, or they go to church and they're not really Christians, which is definitely the case. Not everyone who calls himself a Christian is meaningfully a Christian, but the fact is we don't have a Christometer where we can wave it around people and figure out who's a true Christian and who's not, including them. I can't see into people's hearts, and neither can the people.
Or a true Southern Baptist, or a true, whatever version of Christian you're talking about. The same thing applies. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, all we have to work from is behavior, verbal and otherwise. So if someone says they're a Christian and they go to church, I just don't feel like I'm in a position to say that they're not. And I would add, though, that this kind of approach is kind of opportunistic and selective, because if you listen to, Jordan Peterson or Tom Holland, they attribute everything under the sun to Christianity. Like, every moral and decent thing is somehow religious, or somehow Christian. And I mean, so they kind of go back and forth between, everyone's a Christian and no one's a Christian, depending on which context they're in. But, my novel idea here is to just take people at their word until given reason to think otherwise. So if people report as Christians, then I'm just going to take them at their word.
And of course, the problems with what you're saying there are, the correlation fallacy. So what is really driving those behaviors? And actually, that's something we can talk about in a little while. Before we do so, let's have a little look at, I compiled a bunch of claims to do with morality and Christianity and the non-religious. In Christians, their morality and their ironic intolerance. And I put this together into a video, so you can check one of my videos. Like, I think the video was like, are Christians more moral than atheists, or something like that. But here there's just so much data. I'll try and read a few little snippets here. Principles of Religious Prosociality, a Review and Reformulation by Preston et al. Historically, religion and religious belief have often been credited as the source of human morality, but what have been the real effects of religion on prosocial behavior? A review of the psychological literature reveals a complex relation between religious belief and moral action, leading to greater prosocial behavior in some contexts, but not in others, and in some cases actually increasing antisocial behavior. In addition, different forms of religious belief are associated with different styles of cooperation. This body of evidence paints a somewhat messy picture of religious prosociality. However, recent examinations of the cognitive mechanisms of belief help to resolve their apparent inconsistencies. So on and so forth. Saraglu, who's a great researcher into this stuff, a religion's role in prosocial behavior, myth or reality. If you turn to empirical research, the answer to your question becomes more difficult and quite complex. On the one hand, self-report, and this is what I was talking about earlier, self-report measures of different aspects of prosociality: volunteering, helping behavior, agreeable personality, low psychoticism, forgiveness, valuing benevolence, sense of generativity, provide systematic evidence in favor of the above theories. Religious people report being prosocial, and they do so across a large variety of the above-mentioned ways in which prosociality is expressed, right? So this is the idea that religious people are more pro-social when you get them to self-report their pro-sociality. Interestingly, this pro-social tendency as a function of religion seems to be universal, so that happens across cohorts and different religions. On the other hand, there are many counter-indications, or at least findings implying skepticism, especially but not only, when we move to studies using measures other than self-report questionnaires. First, the tendency of religious people to volunteer may simply be an artifact of belonging to religious organizations that happen to organize volunteer-type activities. Second, the size of associations between religion and pro-social measures is usually weak. Third, not all religious dimensions implies pro-social tendencies. Fundamentalist, orthodox, in some cases intrinsically religious people often show prejudice, discrimination, or at least lack of pro-sociality towards outgroups or people threatening their values. So on and so forth, talks about, looking at these different behaviors with a skeptical eye and trying to unpick the methodology, and a lot of supposed a lot of research that supposedly supports religious people being more moral, and it's really not the case at all, and then so on and so forth. And it just gets more and more evidence to suggest that the more religious you are, the more likely you are to be kind to your in-group. I mean, I'm really shortcutting it here because there's so much you can see, so much data. You're more likely you are to be pro-social to your in-group, and the less likely you are to be kind to your out-group. And in fact, you are more aggressive. And basically, religion is a really good way of supporting tribalism. Sorry, a lot of talking, Emerson.
There's some other data that I think is pretty commonly known that you can find referenced quite a bit in these sorts of discussions. I think it might be useful, actually. I haven't done this yet, but I think I might try to make another version of the argument that relies on that data that compares societal health and happiness between different countries, and it kind of shows that
right.
The more secular countries are kind of they score higher on many indicators of health and happiness and so on than religious countries.
As if by magic, I have this for you.
Oh, you do have it in front of you?
I have this right here. So I wrote an article on this, and Phil Zuckerman wrote an article on this, because the new happiness reports, UN happiness report came out, which shows that in the top 20, in the top 10, all of them are like the least religious countries in the world, apart from Israel, which is quite a complex state of affairs because it's got a growing orthodoxy in there. But there are a lot of secular Jews. And how do we measure happiness? And this is itself an interesting way that they put it together. It's not just like, are you happy? Yeah, I'm happy. Look, I smile a lot. They do actually count how much you smile a day and all these kind of things. But as I write here, what underwrites a happy country? The variables are plentiful, split into life evaluations, positive emotions and negative emotions, GDP per capita, life expectancy, social support, welfare, and someone to count on in times of trouble, a sense of freedom to make life decisions and thus control over one's life, perceived levels of corruption, trust in public institutions, doing or learning something of interest, smiling and laughing, the aforementioned measures of pro-social behavior, which are volunteering, kindness to strangers, and something else I can't remember. Well-being, inequality within regions, sadness, anger, worry and stress, and so on. In other words, it's a whole heap of stuff, and I'll read you some more in a sec, but I'll give you a chance to talk about that. Well, a whole heap of stuff.
I mean, there are more sort of morally relevant features as well. I just pulled out this book I have. It's The Best Argument Against God by Graham Oppy. And he doesn't really make a meager moral fruits argument exactly, but he does write some things that do directly bear on it. But he pulls up some of this data that people talk about comparing, secular and religious countries. So just with rates of burglary, murder, rape, suicide, assault, and other sort of indicators like that. Like the happiness stuff is interesting, but I'm not sure it directly bears on the meager moral fruits argument. But obviously, rates of murder, rape, and burglary, and they also listed software piracy, the worst of all. But I mean, it's pretty predictable. The more secular a country is, there seems to be this inverse correlation between religiosity and all these negative negative traits of a society, of societal health.
But
And
I think,
that's just not what you would predict, in a country with a vast majority, of the population being Christian.
but I think that you say that you don't know how much these are connected to the meager moral fruits argument.
Well,
But
like happiness.
I would say but I would say this is really interesting because you make a parallel argument. So you call it the meager happiness fruits argument, or you make it the meager welfare fruits argument, or you make it the meager well-being fruits argument. So I think these are fascinating in the fact that they basically follow the same.
Possibly less of a theological premise that could support that sort of argument, though. I mean, the
Well,
moral stuff is pretty clear cut.
but well-being, you okay, if you were, although you might not be able to find the exact quote in the Bible that supports this, but I'm pretty sure you could. Like if you were an omnibenevolent God and you created the universe and you had a set of entities, some of who believed in you and some of who didn't, some who created religions that were all about believing in you, surely you would set up the state of affairs such that the people who believed in you would have the greater well-being than the people who didn't.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, there's, the joy of the Lord, there's the guy who wrote It Is Well. But, then there are people like Job in the Bible. Like there are lots of people, in who are mentioned in scripture, and also just, Christian figures who had really hard lives. And it was a pretty common theme in church, at least back when I was going, that like, being a Christian doesn't mean you'll have like a happy life necessarily.
But I think that would just be bizarre if you were ultimately responsible for everything and had ultimate power over everything, that you would make a scenario whereby, do you know what, the guys that get it right, the guys that choose the correct state of affairs, which is believing in me, I'm gonna congratulate you by giving you worse well-being than the people who don't.
That seems how God operates, at least sometimes in the Bible.
But this being an argument against God, I would.
No, I don't know. It's consistent with Christian theology. That's why I was saying that like the theological premise would be pretty hard to establish, because it seems
But I think what you're doing is sorry, I'm interrupting. But what you're doing is pointing out individual figures who might go through that journey towards eventual salvation. But if you had to say that, yeah, but literally for everyone who believes, not in the people wrangling with stuff, just like generally, if you're just a general believer, you're going to have worse welfare, worse happiness, and worse.
I don't know. I think this is kind of like prosperity gospel that you're affirming here, and I don't really. It's not that that's an implausible interpretation of Christianity, but it certainly is not like the only one or the traditional one or anything like that. Like just the idea that being a Christian will lead to greater prosperity and happiness and well-being. Like, I don't know if that's the actual message.
But that's the abductive argument. Why wouldn't it?
It's inconsistent with Christian theology. It's not a prediction of Christian theism.
I don't think it's inconsistent with theology. I think it might be inconsistent with some of the stories you see in the Bible. But
I don't know. I feel like I heard this all the time when I went to church. Like, you're not promised a good life and a great time if you're Christian.
But that's how you explain everyone's woes in their lives, like, and being able to still believe. Given,
but it's not ad hoc though. It seems like it's not ad hoc. It's like actually built into the theology, like that kind of emphasis on suffering and yeah. I mean, Job is not like an outlier. I mean, an outlier is like Solomon.
But do they? But the idea here is they're suffering. So the idea is if people who believe in God suffer more than people who don't believe in God, then you're saying believing in me will make you suffer. It's not like people suffer in general, and I'm going to explain your suffering. That suffering is spread out across humanity. What we're now saying is that actually it turns out that Christians suffer more. And
I don't know. I have no idea. I just don't think that the theological premise of the meager fruits of well-being or whatever, I just don't think that that's really supportable to nearly to the same extent as like a theological premise in a meager moral fruits argument.
So Phil Zuckerman, in his argument on the same UN report, said, but given the variables included in the study, such as subjective measures of well-being, calmness, and feeling at peace, the rankings make sense. If by happy we don't mean ecstatically joyful, but rather experiencing a general sense of contentment, on that front, the strongly secular nations that are in the top 10 certainly deserve to be there. With their extensive systems of welfare capitalism, they experience the highest degrees of freedom in the world, while also the lowest levels of inequality. They enjoy free or highly standardized healthcare, childcare, elder care, education, and so forth. Their societies are extremely safe and humane. No wonder the citizens are the most content and happy in the world. But what exactly is the relationship between these nations' happiness and their secularity? To assert that they are happy because they are secular is not statistically warranted. So again, this is talking about the correlation, causation idea. It would be a bull case of apparent correlation but not proven causation. That said, for those who persistently claim that religion is a necessary component of a healthy, happy society, insisting that if religious faith and involvement fade, the results will be deleterious, well, that position is demonstrably untenable. The data presented in this latest World Happiness Report, with highly secular nations consistently holding the top positions, render the argument that society needs religion in order for its citizens to thrive is simply not true.
I mean, I guess it depends what context you're in. Like, are you arguing with like a Tom Holland type or a Jordan Peterson type who's saying that, like, in the absence of, you know, believing in God, like everything will just collapse? Or, you know, like, I mean, what you're saying, it's not like I'm saying it's haram to say what you're saying in any context. I'm just saying, like, in the context of a meager moral fruits argument, we should stick to, like, you know, moral behavior and character and so on, rather than happiness and well-being.
Yeah, oh no, and I agree. Like, this is mainly talking about the meager moral fruits, but my point being that actually I think you can parallel this argument to present ones which would be interesting in terms of all those ideas of well-being. Because if I was a omnibenevolent God, I would find it really hard to justify. I think it is really hard to justify why an omnibenevolent God would put the people who get it right and believe in the right state of affairs to suffer more on earth and to have lower well-being and lower happiness and be involved in more wars and etc etc etc.
I mean, I'm currently thinking about, like, the Jewish people, and how they seem to answer to that description in many, many ways. I mean, like, they're supposedly the chosen people, and they've had a pretty rough go of it.
But that's yeah, precisely. But that has caused them to then post hoc rationalize that with a bunch of biblical stories.
It seems like it's more often than not, you know, the biblical stories are like, you know, and here are the Jews having a hard time again. Like,
yeah.
I'm not a Christian, but, like, you know, so I don't want to speak on behalf of Christians with like theological matters, but, you know, I'm just, like, kind of referencing half remembered things from church and so on. Like, it just seemed like a pretty common thing that, like, you know, hey, we're not promising you, you know, prosperity and that nothing hard will ever happen in your life. What we're promising you is, like, subtly different from that.
I mean, this is why arguably heaven and hell were invented, because in that, you know, intertestamental period where you've got the Seleucid Empire oppressing Jews, but the Hellenistic Jews were, you know, oppressing the chosen ones, the Orthodox, if you can call them that at the time. And then they're like, oh, how can bad stuff happen to good people? And then they looked at the Hellenistic sort of paradigm. They looked over to Greece and saw, like, Tartarus and hell and the transcendent soul kind of entity, and then they're like, okay, we can explain this now with heaven and hell, and the books can be balanced in this just world. It must be a just world somehow, and it can only be balanced if we have a heaven where, you know, if bad stuff happens to good people on earth, it's all right, we get compensated with heaven. But of course, compensation is not moral justification, and there are loads of problems with that whole thing anyway. But, you know, I would argue that so much of the theology we see in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible is a post hoc rationalization and a response to the fact that shit happens, and it really shouldn't, given an omnibenevolent God.
I mean, I think post hoc is kind of uncharitable. I mean, I think that they were, like, earnestly trying to deal with the fact that bad things happen to good people. And, you know, I mean, the people who wrote the Bible, they were just ordinary human beings, in some cases just trying to deal with the suffering that's built into human existence. So
Yeah,
like, you know,
yeah.
I'm not necessarily like,
That's what I mean by post hoc. I mean, otherwise you'd have to admit that Job actually existed, or Job actually existed and had that conversation with God. Like and Satan. Like if you don't believe that, then this is a post hoc rationalization of suffering.
I just can we return to that like
Yeah.
societal data real quick?
Yeah.
I wanted to bring something up because again, I don't know why I'm so sensitive to this type of response, but I think it's because it comes from atheists and Christians, where they kind of question the premise of this argument, where it's like, would this even be evidence for Christianity, or is this evidence for naturalism? The idea that secular countries, you know, like by and large, like seem more moral. You know, when you look at the more fine grained data about some of these, like, you know, universally agreed upon moral behaviors. I'm not even talking about controversial stuff. I'm talking about like murder, rape, burglary, theft, that sort of thing. So, I think that we like look. I will happily grant right away that if it were the case that we observed the opposite, that like highly religious countries like the United States were far better off than highly secular countries like Scandinavian nations, then that would be some evidence for Christianity. Like um, if wherever there were large groups of Christians, things just were generally better, morally speaking, then that would absolutely be evidence for Christianity, because of the theological premise. There are predictions about the way the world should look built into Christian theology, um, that would lead us to have that expectation. And I'm sure Christians would reference it constantly if there were,
Yeah.
you know, if these secular countries were just like murdering and raping each other nonstop, and like Christian countries were just living in harmony. Um, Again, I totally accept that that would be valid evidence, because it's not some kind of weird like ad hominem. It's not like we're appealing to, I don't know, what we want to be true. I don't know. Like the way that people object to this is so strange to me. It's just it's very clear. There are predictions being made by this model of the world that are not being borne out. Just because they involve character and moral behavior, it doesn't matter. It's not like an ad hominem fallacy or something like that. But anyway, if this were the case, it would absolutely be evidence for Christianity. And you know, we can go into the weeds of this. I think we did a little bit last time, but if E is evidence for H1 over H2, you know, if some line of evidence favors hypothesis 1 relative to hypothesis 2, that means that the negation of that, not E, is evidence for H2 relative to H1. So if we grant that, you know, this hypothetical world I'm talking about would be one in which Christianity is more likely to be true, then the fact that we don't observe that is evidence for naturalism relative to Christianity. The fact that we observe the opposite of what we would expect if Christianity were true is evidence against Christianity.
That's a really, really good point, and well made. Thank you for that. If you've got any questions, any super chats, that's really great for your support and for interacting with us. Really appreciate that. As ever, like, subscribe, share, all the stuff that other YouTubers say that I'm now starting to say because I do YouTube or something. Please do all that. What made me I love what you're talking about there, because when you talk about things like murder and rape and great crimes, as in big crimes, not hey, they're great.
Software piracy.
Yeah, and that's oh dear, I'm a bad man. Just no, not if you're out there, no, I haven't done it. So these things are very clearly are less in more secular countries. Now, we're not saying, incidentally, that well, at least I'm not saying that these murder rates are lower in secular countries because we're atheists generally, or it's like atheism leads to lower. I mean, the causal variables are wide, and what's really interesting is you can also use this argument across time. So not only across geography presently, and you say, right, the most secular countries in the world, let's take, so I don't know, Norway, Finland, the Scandi countries, have really high welfare, really low crime rates. So morally, you know, we're going to measure them on crime. Then actually the most secular countries, most non-religious countries are the most moral countries in this measurement. But we can also measure it across time and say, as we have all become more secular, all the countries that have become more non-religious over time, including America and Britain, and our two countries, then actually the less we have become religious, the more our crime rates have improved. And someone like Steven Pinker in Enlightenment Now and the angels of our better nature, better angels of our nature, or whatever, whichever way around that is, has pointed this out and say that although there are blips, generally, if you look over time, you would prefer to live now than 600 years ago when we were far more religious, but had far worse sort of moral proclamations and crime.
Yeah, if you were only considering that data, then yeah, you would definitely want to, I think. But maybe there are other considerations. But I mean, putting that aside, yeah, I think that I don't want to be misunderstood as saying that like, oh, atheists are better people, or like, if everyone becomes an atheist, we'll all be better off. Like, no, that's not the case. What I'm saying is that it would be evidence for Christianity if Christian nations were, if they scored higher on these measures of like societal health that we've been talking about. So once we grant that, then the fact that we observe the opposite is necessarily evidence for naturalism. But yeah, I'm not trying to say that, oh, well, they're so good because they're atheists. Like, no, that's not.
And I'm 100% with you. So I would argue that it's because of greater welfare from social democracies that produce education and use Enlightenment values and all these other things, which interestingly, the Enlightenment, I think, is an important part of that. But yeah, absolutely 100%. And you can look at things like the Global Peace Index. It looks at all these nations across the world and then plots them for like religiosity against like how much peace they have, and again, the more non-religious the nation, the less crime and war and violence that there is, and the better, the more non-religious the nation is, the better they feature on the Global Peace Index.
Yeah, and I will say there's one common response to this that does come up eventually, like once Christians kind of stop rejecting the theological premise. They're like, okay, I'm done trying to do that. But the thing is, I am better than I was before. So, maybe Christians don't have the kind of reputation as a group that you might expect, but, like William Lane Craig says this, like he says, I'm a much better person than I was before I became a Christian. And that's kind of the next step that I see a lot of religious people taking. But, just kind of comparing before Christ and after Christ in their own lives and saying that they are better. So that doesn't defeat the argument, because we're still affirming the theological premise and saying that Christianity is a morally transformative religion. They've granted that, okay, well, if it's a morally transformative religion, if Christians are new creatures in Christ, then there should still be a group difference. Like, unless this moral improvement just puts them on a par with everyone because they were like really, really evil before. Like, so it's like, no, Christianity is this transformative religion, and it's bringing all these Christians up to the same level as everyone else because they were all really evil before. Like, unless that's the case, we should still be seeing group differences,
Yeah. Absolutely, and what you then say is to the William Lane Craigs of the world who are saying, before I was this, before I was a Christian, I was, a poor version of what I am now, and look how wonderful I am. Again, this looks rather like self-reporting, which is like, okay, that looks like you're saying you're wonderful, but actually, what's the data behind this? So you can tell us how wonderful you are now and how horrible and evil you were as a non-Christian before, but really, how can we measure that, the truth of that? And are you how kind are you to people outside your own in-group?
And I mean, look, I'm willing to just grant him. He says I'm a better person than I was before. I say, you know what? That's fantastic. I'm glad that that's true. But once you admit that Christianity is a morally transformative religion, you should see these group differences. Like, as soon as you affirm that theological premise, then you've got to take issue with the argument on some other area. But just on the point about like, justifying the empirical premise, like you were just talking about, not relying on self-report data or something like that. I think that because this is, some sort of moral argument, that like quantifying things, measuring things objectively is going to be a lot harder. So this is kind of why I brought up Mr. Rogers earlier. So I don't think that you need like scientific evidence to prove that Mr. Rogers was a nice guy. You don't need quantifiable, objective, so you don't need some kind of double-blind randomized trial to prove, to support the proposition Mr. Rogers was a kind person and a nice guy. So like, if you ask, how would you go about proving that? What if someone, demanded scientific evidence that Mr. Rogers was a nice guy? Like, look, the bottom line is I think that everyone listening to this feels that they are justified in believing that Mr. Rogers was a nice guy, despite the fact that they've provided no scientific evidence. There's no randomized trial. There's no quantifiable anything going on. It's just, it's something that everyone just kind of knows to be true. It's a judgment that we can all recognize. I think that's perfectly fine. Like, I think it would be pretty weird, actually, to demand scientific evidence for a claim like Mr. Rogers was nice. So just like, imagine a world where everyone made the same kind of normative judgment about Christians. Like, everyone just comes to a similar conclusion. It's just kind of common knowledge that Christians are great, wonderful people, unusually good people. They noticeably stand out from non-Christians, and everyone just kind of knows that. Like, everyone just kind of knows that Mr. Rogers was a nice guy. So what I'm saying is that's the kind of world where you could definitely say that would be evidence for Christianity, and the fact that everyone is just kind of morally on a par is evidence for naturalism.
I've really just got like the importance of what you said before about William Lane Craig saying that. As I've written down here, people admitting that Christianity has made them good, or claiming that Christianity has made them good. That claim, which is a really common claim, like there are going to be no Christians that say, "Oh, do you know what? Becoming a Christian has made me a bit worse." Like, no Christian's going to come on and say, "I've become a Christian, and it turns out I'm a bit more of a bastard than I was before because of my Christianity." Like, so therefore, this must be exceptionally common, if not universal. I can't imagine, and same for Islam or any religion, I can't imagine any religious adherent is going to come along and not say this, which is, now I'm a member of this religious organization or this religion, I am a better human being than I was before. Right. So if you are claiming that, even if you're not saying that openly, if you're just kind of believing that inherently, then that is, as you say, that is prima facie evidence for the truth of the theological premise that this religion makes you better, and therefore, if this religion makes you better, in general, people who are members of this religion should be better. And which is what kind of then leads into, like, Sobek, Lord of the Four Corners, saying, yep, Paul literally says in 2 Corinthians 3:18, we are being transformed, literally conforming to and participating in Christ. Empirically, we can safely say this has never been the case. Lol. But sorry, a lot of me talking. I was just like, had this realization what you were saying was much more important than I took it for.
Yeah, I mean, there are some like kind of stock objections, and that's one of them. I'm personally a better person, or the no true Christian response, or the kind of the empirical challenges, or just like kind of rejecting the theological premise, which again just can't be sustained unless they want to massively reinterpret lots of scripture and lots of tradition, and they're going to have to explain what being a new creature in Christ means exactly, if it doesn't make you a better person. I didn't used to kick puppies, but since I accepted Christ, I kick all. Yeah, I've been transformed by Christ. I've been transformed into a serial killer.
Yeah,
that's usually not what they mean.
Yeah, but I think that's a really important point, again, to just reiterate what I just said. That I think the theological premise must surely intuitively be what everyone believes, unless they're trying really hard not to believe it because it's convenient for them not to believe that, because the argument then fails.
Yeah, when Trent Horn talked about this argument on his podcast, he didn't even try to reject the theological premise. Like, he challenged it on empirical and moral grounds. He said, we're often going to disagree about what is or isn't moral, and that's true, but we often don't. So it's easy to stick to those cases. And also, empirically, some of these can be difficult to justify, some of these arguments, because they make really grand, essentially sociological claims. But my whole point during the episode is like, hey, you can play around with this organization, the theological, empirical, and moral premises, and experiment with different versions of those, and you can make good meager moral fruits arguments. Just because Draper's make these kind of exorbitant empirical claims that can't really be substantiated, it doesn't mean that like every meager moral fruits argument has to do that. But yeah, I appreciated that Trent Horn didn't really even try to deny the theological premise.
So Mitch Mazarol, as he says he's French. I've got a degree in French, but I don't ask me to speak it anymore. That's a long time gone. Curious whether data sets diverge, Christian versus naturalistic. If there is some common ground to be found, what is it?
Morally, I mean, murder is bad, rape is bad. I mean, also increasingly with the younger generation, I mean, it seems like overwhelmingly the younger generation of Christians is very pro LGBT, like in a way that's kind of weird to me. Like I went to a Christian campus in the last couple of years. My younger brother was like looking at some colleges. We were actually at Calvin College, which is where Alvin Plantinga was based out of, along with Notre Dame for a long time. And man, it was weird because it was just very pro LGBT, and like a lot of it wasn't exactly what I expected to see. But yeah, there's a big difference between like Zoomer Christians and older Christians, which in a way that I haven't quite grasped. I'm 27, so it's like they're just young enough where I'm just like weirded out by the things they're doing. but
yeah, so I mean, I've spoken to a number of Christians who and looked into this, and there's good research to suggest that people, and this is what you started off the talk by saying, which is that people are leaving Christianity. One of the main reasons I think that young people are leaving Christianity is because it doesn't fit with the moral zeitgeist. The idea that the moral landscape has changed now, and people find X, Y, and Z much more morally acceptable, or morally neutral, or morally good, or whatever, and that Christianity or their religion doesn't fit in, it doesn't allow for that, and so one has to go. And it turns out that people are leaving organized religious Christianity, largely on account of the fact that the moral fit isn't there.
Yeah. It's not enabling them to pursue the good for themselves and for others. And the way that, Christians will sometimes present this to me when I'll ask them about their own personal views conflicting with the views of the church or official teaching or what have you, what I hear sometimes is like, I don't really see what's wrong with, gay marriage, but the church does teach that it's wrong. And you got to lean on, the church's teaching and not your own understanding sometimes. And I just lost my train of thought because someone buzzed my door, but I think it was a mistake. So
I was going to go back to, just before we start sort of wrapping the
sorry, I just regained my train of thought. So what I was saying is there's a limit to that. So like, I understand a good Christian, their own understanding is not going to perfectly line up with the moral teachings of the church. And but it's not like with these younger Christians, it's just like one thing and then they're gone. It's like it's a cumulative thing. So what's going on is that there's one thing that doesn't really morally sit right with them, and then there's another thing and another thing. And what I'm saying is everyone has this line. It's not just these sinful LGBT affirming Christians. It's everyone. Even the staunchest traditionalist is going to have some kind of limit where the church is teaching something that is so contrary to your moral intuitions. If this just keeps happening over and over again, eventually you're going to say, maybe the church is wrong.
Yeah. So if you have like 100 different moral positions, right, and you say, right, is this good or bad? And you say, right, it's good. Okay, so we would expect Christians, for example, Southern Baptists, for example, to score better on this. If this, and you go down, you really would, if the belief was true, you really expect I don't see there being a good reason why all of those shouldn't feature more prominently for the religious versus non-religious person, but it's either messy or that actually, religious people score negatively, and as you say, that when that happens over and over again, you've got to start wondering whether they've got it right.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that in defense of Christians who eventually break away from the Christian tradition because of the moral teachings of the church. It's like they're not different from anyone else. Like what I'm saying is everyone has their own breaking point where if the church started teaching something that was contrary to your moral intuitions, like as those things start to stack up, you will eventually just leave. You'll go to another church or another religion, or you'll just walk away altogether. There's nothing irrational about that. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, what I'm saying is at the end of the day, we're making these moral judgments, and to a large extent, we are leaning on our own understanding because that's all you can do.
And this is where it's interesting, where it gets a bit more complex, arguably, if you want to take it there, which is where I've been doing a lot of work on divine command theory recently, which is to say that, and this is linking stuff together with the Enlightenment, where we start doing sort of moral reasoning a lot more, and then that integrating with politics and law and society, you start seeing improvements across the board because we're doing moral philosophy rather than relying on divine command theory. And it gets even worse for the Christian in this case, or for the theist, because moral reasoning is a better way of arriving at a moral conclusion than because God said so. And so what I'm saying here is that you can come at many you can go off in many kind of like rabbit holes with the MMF argument that we've been talking about in terms of, why is it that non-religious people are featuring better on these moral proclamations? It's because we're using our faculties of moral reasoning and enlightened philosophy to do that, and that's what you'd expect if you use moral reasoning. I guess I don't really know where I was going with that, but it sounded good in my head. So I just wanted to go back to my piece on happiness, which is to say, from the UN report again, so there are three markers. So one of the editors, John Helliwell, told CNN Travel, the big surprise was that globally, in an uncoordinated way, there have been very large increases in all three forms of benevolence that are asked about in the Gallup World Poll. These three markers of benevolence, donating to charity, helping strangers, and volunteering, have all seen an uptick in 2021 compared to 2020, or before the pandemic. And for helping strangers, the move has been particularly positive. And again, to go back to, you can't argue that helping strangers, if Jesus has said that in the Good Samaritan, and not just strangers, but actually people in the outgroup, that's particularly a story about helping people who are in your outgroup who you otherwise don't like. And that's exactly where the data looks that the more religious you are, the less well you do on that. As we talked about before, I just wanted to revisit that because there was a little quote there. But, you can't really argue with the data to suggest that actually the more religious you are, the less nice you are to the people in the outgroup.
I haven't looked into that. I wouldn't, I wouldn't try to go out on a limb without having, looked into that sort of research myself. I mean, I'm so skittish about, a lot of this social psychology and sociology. It seems like with the replication crisis and with, I don't know, just some of their methodology and like their whole approach in the last like several decades, it just kind of, I just wouldn't believe anything unless I looked into it myself. Not that I'm saying that you should. I mean, I know you have. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's what I love about the book, The Non-Religious. So Zuckerman, Galen, and Pasquale, they talk a lot about methodology and about, well, this is the headline of this research is, hey, that's really great for this group of people, but you've got to look at the methodology, and the devil's in the detail. And if this is self-report, or that one, it turns out that they're giving charity, they're giving money to their own, and this and that. And so that's why hopefully I've chosen data that takes into account that kind of stuff, especially, as I say, reading that book, which I know you've got that book, but you've not read it. Is that right?
I got it a long time ago because I was a listener to Reasonable Doubts, and Luke Galen was a co-author. But yeah, I never got around to reading it, sadly.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I mean, it's very much a data driven book, and it's if you like that kind of stuff, then but I absolutely love it. So as we draw to a close, thank you for all your support, everyone out there. If you've got any questions, please get them in. Any super chats will be super appreciated. Is there any other nuggets you want to bring in to play with this argument, or where can this argument also go, or any connected arguments?
Honestly, I'm kind of waiting for substantive responses to the argument before I make another episode about it. So a lot of what we talked about here is kind of a preview for what I plan on talking about the common claim that like, oh, I as an individual am better than I was before being a Christian. The idea that like this shouldn't even be evidence one way or the other because we're talking about moral character, and that superficially sounds like some kind of ad hominem. So there are Christian and atheist versions of that particular objection. And just sort of
that, can you just unpick that a little bit?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, so the standard definition of ad hominem is like when you're going after the party advancing the argument rather than the argument or the idea or whatever, and that superficially seems like what we're doing here with the meager moral fruits argument. But as I was explaining earlier, Christian theism makes certain predictions about its adherence compared to its non-adherence. That's the whole theological premise. So it's not an ad hominem. I mean, people are way too trigger happy with these whole like informal fallacies anyway. It kind of leads to superficial criticism, and it's just, I wish people would just kind of knock it off so much with playing the fallacy gotcha game. Because many things superficially look like fallacies that are actually perfectly good inferences. But yeah, this is kind of one of those cases where it's like, no, look, clearly it would be evidence for Christianity if its predictions were borne out relative to naturalism, right? Like naturalism makes certain predictions, Christianity makes certain predictions about what we'll see in the world. And if Christianity's predictions better line up with reality, that's evidence for Christianity. So that's all we're talking about here. Yeah. So just because it's like, prima facie about the character of the people involved, that's not an ad hominem argument. People just don't know what a lot of these fallacies even are. But yeah, so I mean, like I said, there are Christian and atheist versions of that objection. Atheists will say, even if Christians were better, that wouldn't matter. Yeah, it would. Because again, we're just talking about the predictions of Christianity versus the predictions of naturalism, which, according to naturalists, Christianity is a human institution, and human institutions produce mixed results, like they produce good things and bad things. And again, Christianity also predicts that Christian institutions and Christians would form sort of a mixed bag, but it makes definite predictions that diverge from the predictions of naturalism about the character of its adherents. I mean, that's undeniable. Like, it's really amazing that anyone tries to deny it. But and then also just some more basic stuff I plan on addressing about sort of how we know anything, like, sort of basic epistemology, like, are we allowed to make claims about the world without providing randomized trials and objective, quantifiable scientific evidence? I'm firmly on the side of yes, you can make judgments about the world without providing that sort of evidence. But I think that some people kind of naively think that, it has to be scientific evidence, it has to be objective and quantifiable, or else it's not really good evidence. It's not really a justification for some belief. And that's just flat out wrong.
Well, that's a good segue to what Mitch has said here, which is, what's your hot take on the weight an abductive argument like this should be given? I find it somewhat persuasive, given that this leans on a data-driven approach. I would intuitively agree with that, as in it works in its premises and it is supported somewhat by data. Mm-hmm. And so therefore the weight it should be given, it should be seen in part of a cumulative case of other abductive arguments to say, like, on its own, if there's nothing else, and this is just like, you've picked out one jelly bean, then you're like, well, this jelly bean on its own doesn't tell you that, like, if this is the only jelly bean I've got, I'm probably better off believing that God doesn't exist. But really, that's a very small sample size. So almost that you can have a meta argument here about, like, sample size and data, in about like arguments here. So, which is interesting. Like, empirically speaking, this is only one argument. This is a data set of one. So, but when you start looking at like 20, when you've taken 20 beans out, when you've got 20 different arguments, and pretty much all of these better support atheism, which is kind of where Paul Draper went with this, like this is one argument out of many, then it's fairly strong, or they are fairly strong. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think that strictly rationally speaking, this does move the needle in favor of naturalism. Like, I think that this argument is stronger than the argument from scale, to give an example. Like, that's an argument for atheism that works, but I think just like barely perceptibly moves the needle, like in favor of naturalism.
As in, you're saying the universe is so big.
Universe is big. Yeah.
Again,
and then on the other end of the spectrum, we have like, Draper's argument from evil, like that being very powerful abductive evidence. And, so I think that this argument is weaker than like some arguments from evil or soteriological discord, but it's more powerful than like the argument from scale. So it does move the needle a little bit, strictly rationally speaking. However, there's an additional element to this argument that is sort of pragmatic in nature. Because we are just trying to figure out what's true about the world. That's what we've been talking about. But if Christianity is being an obstacle to the pursuit of the good for yourself, that's a pretty good reason to not be a Christian. Again, not because like, oh, well, I've rationally assessed the evidence, and since this is more likely on naturalism than Christianity, I have become a naturalist. Like, yeah, no, that's great.
This goes back to the mattering I was talking about earlier. Like, if really this is all about mattering, and really if existence is all really about morality, then actually that means that this argument is slightly stronger than maybe it otherwise would be.
Okay, I think I get what you were saying now. Yeah, I mean, the pursuit of the good is one of the most important aspects of human existence. It's not some trivial concern like, okay, well, first we'll do our Bayesian calculus, and then at the end we'll try to figure out how to live a good life. It's like, no, I think you might have that backwards, actually. Like, if Christianity is actually inhibiting you, and it's an impediment to living a good life, like a moral life, is what I mean, then you shouldn't be a Christian. Like, I mean, just on pragmatic grounds. So, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I would diverge from some atheists in that, because I'm totally happy to say that, if Christianity, and by the way, this is a two-way street. If Christianity really makes you a better person, improves the quality of your life, that's a good reason to be a Christian. It's not a decisively overwhelming reason, but the idea that it's off limits, that it's not that's out of bounds, it's like some kind of consideration that you shouldn't care about, that's just insanity. Like, the idea that you shouldn't care about stuff that matters, about like living a good life, like the idea that shouldn't factor into what you believe and what you do, it's just pure confusion. And I wish people would step out of it.
This is fascinating, because you could come up with a really cool like policy thing where, as you say, like in education policy, you say, right, we know that if children learn to read and have a love of reading, right, then they go on to aspire to greater things and achieve better and have much better life successes in all sorts of different domains, right? So reading is seen as really important. So we say to children, you really need to read. And in fact, we're going to test you on your reading capabilities at this age and this age and this age, because we know how important it is to flourishing as a human being, right? So if you then say, we've looked at all the data, and it turns out that non-religious people, on balance, are better moral agents than religious people, we are now going to press at school that you shouldn't be religious. And in fact, we're going to test you at this age and this age and this age to make sure that you're not religious. I mean, it sounds like communist, like Soviet Union, but that's a really interesting argument that you could actually generate some kind of like, if on average, if we looked at all the data, it turns out that non-religious countries are better than, morally better than religious countries, and then therefore we can make a statistical, conclusion that it's better to be a non-religious country, even if it's only correlating to these things. Then you could start driving out religion from a policy point of view.
I mean, I think you have to take it on a case by case basis. I don't think that there's any like one size fits all, like Christianity is good for everyone or bad for everyone. Like, it does seem to be good for some people, and it does seem to be genuinely bad for some people. Like, it's, it's kind of hit and miss, but
but the point is, if it's more hit than miss, or more miss than hit, that's the point.
I don't think that's a very good. I think this should just be left to individuals to figure out, what's best for them. But no, I mean, I think
should it be left to individuals as to whether their kids should read or not?
well, I think that's a little less controversial than religion. I mean, the data is not clear cut. Like, okay, so should it be left to individuals whether their child gets adequate nutrition? No, that's required. If you don't do that, then you're not meeting your basic requirements as a parent. But if you choose to raise your, it's just not. It's obviously not the same as religion.
Is it not? Is it not? So
it's not the same.
Am I playing? No. Okay. So if the data is in that in the US, as a white Christian, you are statistically more likely to be racist, then is there not a case to say?
No, there's no case.
you're statistically, actually, like as a parent, it's probably better off that I don't, because
I mean, there's a part of me. So if we're just off in like philosophy thought experiment land,
that's what I'm doing here.
Okay, well then, like, I'm fine with entertaining things like this, like just for fun, even though I'm still totally against it, even if we're off in thought experiment land. But if we're talking about like any kind of real world policy here, I would march in the streets against the kind of thing that you're suggesting, where it's like, because I'm completely pro religious freedom at the end of the day. You should not be like, like you shouldn't be spied on.
Record, I am as well, as long as well, actually I'm
you shouldn't be I mean, you shouldn't. I don't know what you're actually saying, but like you shouldn't
nor do I. I'm thinking
ding parents. Okay, you shouldn't count as a strike against parents to raise their kids religious unless there's like directly abuse involved, which sometimes there is. You shouldn't be spied on just because you're Muslim. Like there are all kinds of like religious there's a religious freedom angle to this that I'm like a firm believer in, that would kind of on principle I would kind of oppose anything that we would talk about going forward.
But it gets like pretty interesting that if you're, and I'm not saying it does, but if your religion said, right, arguably it does, right? So the Christian religion arguably says homosexuality is a sin, or the act is so you get around it, it's the act that's a sin and not like the person or whatever. But like if it incontrovertibly said homosexuality is a sin, and we're like, okay, as a progressive, that's a real problem. If your religion says that, then actually it is better off. That is a real moral harm to society adhering to that religion. So there is this is the situation we're in, which is like we argue that there are certain moral claims in that religion that are really problematic, and then the religious person says they're not problematic, that's a good, or the religious person says, yeah, they are problematic, and I justify my religious belief in this way, and kind of can harmonize those biblical quotes by saying context, or whatever.
So what should we do about that other than just argue against them?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that we make policy decisions or educational decisions from certain angles and say, well, we shouldn't do this. And I could imagine 50 years time, we might be saying stuff like, vegetarianism is now a policy within like all schools are going to be vegetarian. You can imagine like 100 years time, actually we've moved past it. We're post meat societies or whatever. But yeah, in the Bible, there's still like all this stuff and to do with meat eating and sacrificing animals. There's a tension between moral progression and adhering to a religion that holds this holy book high and mighty. And we're happy to make policy decisions here, but then freedom of religion means, oh, you can still believe in that book, even though I find that book really morally problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best society. That's the best societal organization is freedom of religion and freedom of expression, and that whole sort of broadly liberal approach to things. So yeah, I mean, I think that it follows from those kinds of liberal principles that you shouldn't, for instance, have separate laws for people with different sexual orientations.
Yeah.
So I think that was like kind of an illiberal law that we had. And we got rid of that, so I think that's not like, I don't think that's inconsistent with the kind of liberal pro freedom of religion approach that I'm saying, because you don't have to get gay married.
Which is to say a liberal legal law trumps a religious law.
Yeah, no, the thing is, it sounds like you're talking about like positively going further than the kind of like more neutral liberal approach that I'm talking about. Yeah.
I'm not
Which
advocating that. I'm just wondering. I'm wondering out loud. Yeah, because no, I would have to think about it a hell of a lot more. But it does sound intuitively wrong to produce some kind of like a state religion type approach, but it's not. It's like what I'm trying to say. Really, what I'm trying to talk about is that there is this ongoing tension of competing rights. So when you have a right to freedom of expression religion, but your religion makes a really dodgy moral claim, and then I have this right over here in the domain of that moral claim, then we have a tension going on here, because yes, you have the right to express your religion, but no, that religion is morally problematic in this particular claim that I find abhorrent.
I mean, I think that John Locke's arguments for religious toleration and some of the liberal principles that he was just applying to warring religions, like I think that also applies to us and to everyone else. Like so I'm very against state atheism, which sounds a little bit like what we're talking about. and also like state religion, and like that's, I think that some of the classic arguments for liberalism in this area, those hold not just for warring religious sects who can't agree on what God wants or what's moral, immoral, but also, non-religious sects are in the mix now. And it's the same. I think you can just make these same exact arguments.
So I suppose what I'm saying, really, what I'm really saying is you can believe what you like, but if you believe morally problematic things, that's not okay, right? Which is broadly where I'm at in everything. Now, in Britain, it's really interesting. So we have faith schools here. You've got a secular country, yet you're a secular country with more religious people. We're an apathetic country, but we're not secular, right? And so 37% of our primary schools, elementary schools in the UK up to age 11 are faith-based, are run by faith institutions. So Catholic faith, Catholic school, C of E school, whatever. So interestingly, in those schools, they are allowed to opt out of human rights legislation. So the idea that you've got universal human rights, a Catholic school, they're not universal. So in Britain, a Catholic school can sack a head teacher or a teacher for being gay. They are legally allowed to do that. So this is what, this to me is a huge problem. And I'm sure you probably agree on this point, is that shouldn't be allowed, right? Universal human rights should be universal, right? And put into law. And if that is morally good, that should be, legally ratified. And the fact that you can discriminate someone and do that on account of your faith is kind of the problem I'm talking about here. It's like that shouldn't be allowed. Like the law should trump the religious
you have picked out a gray area case, though, because like what if a Catholic priest was fired for secretly being a Muslim? Like that would seem perfectly fine, but that would be discriminating against someone because of their religious beliefs. But it seems like once you go in the realm of these religious institutions, like the rules do seem a little different.
Well, I'm legally bound to confidentiality here, so saying this on a YouTube video is probably ill-advised, but I was once a teacher in a Catholic school, and then I wasn't a teacher in a Catholic school, and you can probably join the dots there, and it almost became a landmark legal case in the UK, and it didn't, and it's a very long story, and I'm not allowed to talk about it, but yeah, it is a grey area, and it's a grey area in a very bad way, and it should not be a grey area. It absolutely should not. And this is the tension between we have a right as a religious organization to make claims to this moral area. And it's like, but hang on, no, you shouldn't have a right to do that, because that goes against the rights we set out here, and we set out very good moral reasoning, and you are now claiming to trump that. And actually, I'm saying no. The law should trump the moral, the religious moral proclamation.
Well, I mean, I think we can identify two cases. Like, even within a religious school, someone should not be fired for breaking some law, that is, enforced by the state, like pedophilia or something like that. Yeah. Like if they break that law, it's like, well, we're a religious organization, we're Catholic, so we don't see a problem with that. It's like, yeah, we know, but you still have to follow the rules. But then on the other hand, if a Catholic priest gets fired for secretly being Muslim or something, that doesn't intuitively seem wrong to me, even though it does kind of violate this like liberal principle of freedom of religion. So it's like on the one hand, so those are two cases, and I think that like being fired for having the wrong sexual orientation, like whether you think it's closer to the Muslim case or closer to the case of breaking some other law that the state enforces, I think that's like that's where a lot of debate occurs. But
do you know what
I tend
solves
to
that
think
moral
that
problem completely? What
what
solves it is not having state-run faith schools. But that's not your
oh
problem. You don't have that over there, so that would be that
sold
problem would be
yeah.
solved.
Yeah, no, we're in total agreement. I'm against state atheism and state-run religious schools. I think it's kind of, it's sort of in the same category as like monarchy to me, where I'm like, that's a thing over there. Like, I mean, I know it's like a subtly different country, but it's just totally bizarre to me that you have like a queen.
Yes, yeah, it does. Yeah, it is weird, but hey, makes us cool or something. Right. So as we draw to a close, and thank you for everyone for like we've just had a wander through a thought experiment where I almost advocated state atheism and like gulags for anyone believing
Right.
in the religion.
Look, all we're saying is that if parents are religious, they should have their children taken away. Okay? That's all we're saying.
True. I mean, not true. But there's a thought experiment to discuss on another day. Right. As we come to an end, mate, I didn't do this on the last interview with you or chat, whatever you call this. I'm going to do some quickfire for you to get to know. Did I do this last time? I didn't think I did.
I don't think
Quickfire,
so.
asking you some questions. For example, what's your favorite nonfiction book you've ever read?
It's probably something by Kurt Vonnegut, but I would have to choose between those. I guess God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater might be my favorite Vonnegut book. And he's my favorite fiction author. Did you say fiction or nonfiction?
I said nonfiction, but
oh, sorry.
You can answer whatever question you think I said.
My favorite nonfiction book is for a long time it was The Big Picture by Sean Carroll. That book had a huge influence on me. It still influences me, even though I disagree with a lot of it now. And I used to agree with pretty much all of it. I used to agree with practically everything he said in there, except he was a compatibilist and I was a free will skeptic at the time. And then now I think he's wrong about a bunch of other stuff, but I'm with him on compatibilism.
See, I'm a conceptual nominalist, and he's basically sets out a case for conceptual nominalism in that book without like calling it that, and that's why I really like it. But yeah, carry
on. Okay, but that's what it was, and now I'm trying to think. Okay, favorite nonfiction book. Man, that's tough because you say favorite. Okay, and then for a long time after The Big Picture, it was this book, Things That Bother Me by Galen Strawson. And I feel like I've moved past that one a little bit where it's no longer my favorite book, but that was my favorite book for a long time. It's just like a collection of essays.
I love philosophical people. It's like, you say favorite book. Well, what does favorite mean? Like, before I answer this question, let's just talk about terms. And what does what mean? I mean, does what mean why? Anyway,
there are so many questions we have to answer before I can answer the question of what is my favorite book. But I really don't know. But I mean, those would be two that are in the running, I guess, or at least definitely were previously favorite books.
Fiction, you've said, is Kurt Vonnegut, so that's answered that. So, by the way, congratulations on the haircut. Congratulations, wrong word. You've clearly had one. I don't know why I thought that interesting.
Thank you.
So, if you could see a band, dead or alive, that you've never seen before, who would you go and watch tomorrow?
Kind of a boring answer, but I really like John Mayer a lot. I was like obsessed with him in high school, which was, a long time after he was cool and relevant. Yeah. So he used to be someone who like basically only teenage girls listened to. And then like 20 years later, I came along and I was just like, I loved it. Well, because I play guitar and it used to be, before I cared about philosophy and science, the only thing I really cared about was like playing guitar and like doing music stuff. So, and John Mayer is like one of the greatest to ever do it. So
looks like you got a fight on your hand, because apparently the answer was Bauhaus.
Oh, so, I don't know who that is.
That's a German like and as far as I know, like end of synth rock band. But there you go.
I just assumed it was going to be some like death metal band because those people are always very quick to share their opinion.
Okay, well, you're a guitarist. If you could play a song that you can't play at the moment, what would it be?
Canon in D by Jerry C. There's like a 12-year-old YouTube video. One of the first ones to go viral. Like this is like old YouTube. But there's this I don't know who he is or what he's up to, but there's this Asian guy named Jerry C, or at least that's his like YouTube channel, and he played a rendition of Canon in D. And I love that. I mean, I heard it when I was like 11, and I never really learned how to play it. I learned like little bits and pieces, but yeah, I love that. So if I could learn that, then I would be happy.
Okay, so you're just about to be executed for being a religious child of a couple of parents.
Yeah.
And this is in the new society that I've just created, and you're just about to be executed, but you are treated to your last supper. What meal would you have? What would be your last meal?
Cheese pizza. Sorry.
Cheese pizza.
So that's the honest answer. I'm sorry. Like, if it has to be really good, obviously it has to be like New York style. But like, yeah, man, that's like, I have to tell people that I'm a vegetarian and not a vegan, basically because of cheese pizza. Like that's like 95% of the reason why I'm not a vegan. Not big. I mean, like I just, I apologize. I know it's not a good reason, but
I'm a vegan plus fish, so I am slightly morally better than you. But then I take on a fish, which is morally worse. I did it started for health reasons due to my MS, but I then adopt it as a moral thing. So now it's definitely moral, and I can just hold it over people like you.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing that sucks is like dairy is like one of the worst things. It's not quite as bad as like chicken, but it's still
it's worse than people think. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the idea that you have to basically kill all male chickens and kill all male like cows is But anyway, I don't want to get onto that whole thing. But cheese is a problem. Although Domino's now do, who they deliver the decent vegan pizzas. So
no, there's no such thing. They have not figured out the cheese technology over there at the vegan headquarters.
True, it's getting better, but yeah, I'm broadly with you. So other questions. Usually what I end with is this one. You are just about to have your face eaten off by a bunch of pea zombies. We don't know whether they are having subjective experiences or not, but they are going to bite your face off. So you run down to your zombie shelter and you lock yourself in there for a month, but you're allowed to take 3 people with you who aren't your family or any friends or anything like that. So you can't get away with saying, my mum and my girlfriend or whatever. Like stuff, that's out. So you can take 3 people to hang around for a month in this fallout shelter. Who would it be? Dead or alive?
Dead or alive. Okay.
Jesus, Muhammad.
Okay, 3 people. Man, this is such a good question. I'm taking this way too seriously. But I suppose I would.
And people in the comments put who the 3 that you would take with you into that fallout shelter. I'd be interested in what you think. While
I take this answer so seriously.
I mean, it's not literally going to happen, mate. You're right. You can say anyone.
John Mayer. Well, the thing is, I need like, I mean, not to make things too explicit, but like, I need someone interesting. I need obviously like some beautiful woman, and I don't know who the 3rd would be. I'm thinking like, so for some reason,
those 2 can be the same. By the way, someone interesting and a beautiful woman. It's like that. That's really. I thought you were progressive.
Mutually exclusive categories. I mean, I guess if we're gonna. No, I'm just kidding. I guess. God, this is so hard. This is the hardest question you asked me because, I guess I would want Bertrand Russell, and this is just the first actress who came to mind because I just saw the new Blade Runner, but Ana de Armas, I think you say, and God damn. Okay. I was about to say Christopher Hitchens because, okay, actually Bertrand Russell's pretty good on political stuff. So that actually is covered. So maybe another philosophy guy. Maybe like Galen Strawson, I guess. So like, yeah, I'll go with Strawson, Russell, and Ana de Armas.
See, I whenever I say this, I always say that I want people to disagree and I want to just be in on a massive argument. So I get William Lane Craig, Tavita Singer, and then I don't know, Richard Carey or something like that, where you get, except that would be two atheists, you know. But do you know what I mean? I would have like a right ding dong for a month, and you come out just like, it turns out that God doesn't exist, or like does, or no, we've been at it for a month, and honestly, no one agrees.
You know, and I really set myself up for failure by putting Russell in there because, I mean, the idea that, like, I mean, Russell is just famous for being cool. I'll just put it that way. So I think that Russell and Ana de Armas are going to be spending all their time together, and me and Strawson are going to be chatting.
Francis Tumblety, Jack the Ripper suspect, and Quack Doctor. Then Nassim Preacher, Gnostic genius, and Simone Weil, philosopher.
See, that seems unwise to me because of the whole Jack the Ripper thing.
I really want to know whether you are Jack the Ripper. Yes, it was me, and you are now going to be killed. All three of you are going to die.
Have fun sleeping at night. Yeah. There's only one of you that's coming out of that bunker.
I'll take Jeffrey Dahmer, Jack the Ripper, and Hitler. Oh God. Oh no. Anyway, thank you so much for your time here. Thank you for all you people in the chat for keeping us company and for the occasional question. Thanks for all your support. It's really, really appreciated. Thanks for those who super chatted today, Canadian Catholic and Mitch Mazarol. Thank you for, I don't know, having an interesting surname, and for your support. I hope to do this again with Emerson at some point. I don't know if he will go through with any of my like mad cat thought experiments and feel really uncomfortable about answering, saying I'm not sure I'm happy with advocating state atheism and death for all. No, I didn't say that, but whatever. So I hope to do this again, Emerson. It's been really great, and I will be posting more articles that will be dipping into some of your own blog posts in future, because some of your content is all of your content is absolutely fantastic. Do you have any final words? Anything you'd like to say to tell us where to find you?
Oh, yeah. You can find me at Walden Pod on Twitter, and I've got a link tree there. I've got a link tree on my YouTube as well. You can find everything there. But yeah, Emerson Green on YouTube, and Counter Apologetics, Walden Pod on any podcast app that you like. But I was going to ask you this before we went live, but because I was running so late, I just got here and then we immediately went up. But I was going to ask you if you wanted to be a guest on my channel to talk about your new book about the 30 arguments.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yes, I definitely would, actually. And I love this book. It's really, really good, fun book. And I think, I often talk about, you end up spending so much time arguing about, is the resurrection of Jesus, did it happen? You get into all the long weeds of like the nativity and whether like historical and exegetical analysis and theological analysis of this. It's like, yeah, if you can't get over these 30 arguments here, right, all of that is just pie in the sky. That all supervenes on this stuff. And if this stuff is impassable, then I'm sorry, you've got some issues. And actually, some of this is so fundamental that in the same way that I think the free will argument is impassable. And I think, if I did debate, sorry, I'm going off on one here now that you've asked me that question. But like, if I was to debate William Lane Craig, I often say I'd debate free will with him first. Like, yeah, your 4 arguments, great, William Lane Craig. All of that's irrelevant if you can't establish libertarian free will, which your judgmental God requires. So I don't know. Would you agree broadly on those kind of like taking these? People really need to consider more philosophical arguments like this first before getting onto the deeper ones, or the not the deeper, the veneer ones.
Well, it sounds like you've accepted my invitation, first of all. But as for the free will thing, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I want to read. I got the. Just when I saw that you posted it, I started reading the little sample thing on Kindle, and I'm going to buy it and read it before we talk, because I want a better idea of what that argument actually is, of like the crucial importance of libertarian free will to Christian theology, and also open theism. Like, I want to know how that factors into, just based what I read on in the introduction and like the beginnings of the first chapter and everything. I have questions in the back of my mind about the connection between free will and Christian belief and open theism.
Yeah, I mean, open theism is an interesting idea because I think it's just a ad hoc rationalization or ad hoc kind of get out of jail free card for divine foreknowledge, which is effective. So one of my previous videos is entirely on this. The divine foreknowledge is the biggest problem for Christian for classical theism. Like,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but something just clicked with me. I feel so stupid for even so. When I'm considering Christianity, I'm constantly thinking of like the strongest version of Christianity in my head, which is like what I personally consider to be most plausible. And I often forget that Christians are typically not working with the kind of steel-manned Christianity that I have in my head. They believe in, a lot of Christians believe in hell and a certain like soteriological image, and a certain conception of this free will stuff does connect to several crucial aspects of Christian theology. It doesn't really, in my mind palace version of Christianity, where I'm like trying to construct like the most steel-manned version. But yeah, the actual like Christianity out in the wild, like I can totally see how undermining libertarian free will is like extremely devastating. But it is worth noting though that open theism, like you mentioned, whether it's whatever the causal history of how open theism came about is, I don't really know about that, but it is overwhelmingly subscribed to by academics, and it is overwhelmingly not subscribed to among lay people.
But because it is, so if you start with these kind of foundation bricks of philosophy and characteristics like, well, God has to be omnibenevolent, then divine foreknowledge is an absolute nightmare. It's a real problem. So I've said this before, if I was a Christian, I would drop divine foreknowledge. The problem is, if you adopt open theism, one, it doesn't play well with evidence in the Bible, like it's not really biblically evidenced. And two, it devalues God's, like if you're taking on the ontological argument where God is the greatest thing in conception, nothing greater than that. And you say, well, if God doesn't know the future, the future like results of freely willed decision, then God's knowledge is really limited. If like I keep saying this, but if Facebook can accurately predict your behavior based on 300 likes better than your own partner, right, then we can predict supposed freely willed decisions pretty well. And if God can't do that, then God's less effective than Facebook algorithms. So
I think that the idea is like he does have some kind of counterfactual knowledge where he knows like what would happen if you did X, Y, and Z, but because you have libertarian free will, he doesn't know. Like he can guess, oh, he'll probably pick X and not Y or Z. But if he picks X, maybe this will happen, and if he picks Y, this will happen. If he picks Z, this will happen. But because he has libertarian free will, I don't actually know for sure which option he'll select. It's like the future is truly open. And I think in open theism, God also has libertarian free will. So his knowledge is kind of dynamic, where it's like, I think he could have counterfactual knowledge where he could predict everything that would happen given certain assumptions about what will happen. But he doesn't actually know what will happen because of libertarian free will.
But is knowledge a great making property?
I think he has as much knowledge as you could have, since people have libertarian free will.
And it just gets really great then. And you're like, well, is God really just rolling the dice? He's basically like, well, I'm going to create a universe. I have no idea where it's going to go. So here you go, roll the dice. And how can you call him omnibenevolent then?
Well, I just think
as loving
that, like,
as he could be, but then if he could step in, like, so that, God damn it, there are so many interesting ideas that come out of this.
I think that people can reasonably say that, God is constrained by like logical possibility. And if libertarian free will is a feature of God's nature and it's a feature of our nature, then you could still say that he has as much knowledge as is like logically possible to have.
But then you get further problems here. So if you accept open theism, then things like skeptical theism fall apart, because you're saying there's a reason.
If skeptical theism falls apart no matter what, so there's no.
But the idea, but actually theodicies fall apart. Like if you're saying, well, God doesn't know 100% what's going to happen, you're like, well, how can you tell me at the same breath you're telling me that there's a reason that this happened? Well, if you don't know whether that's going to, allow for, like, the only theodicy that really works is a free will theodicy. Like all the other theodicies is like, well, we don't know that's going to be the consequence, because actually God doesn't know where this universe is going. And so open theism just produces a lot more problems than I think it solves. Like, but if I was a theist, I would really struggle with divine foreknowledge. Like, part of the reason I'm not a theist is that all of these arguments render God incoherent. So if you go down the open theism route, you end up with an incoherent God. And if you go with the divine foreknowledge route, that God is equally incoherent, but for lots of other reasons. Therefore, I'm an atheist.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that that works for many conceptions of God. Whenever you're talking about arguments against God, you're necessarily talking about a certain conception of God. So I think that a lot of these arguments do, pretty much decisively rule out like certain conceptions of God, certain very popular conceptions of God. But I think if I'm trying to steelman Christianity and say that, like, okay, maybe the laity just has like kind of like a crude picture of reality, and kind of move on from that and try to argue against the strongest form of Christianity, even though it's like believed by not that many people.
No, I'd say you're still manning theism. I'd say that I would argue vehemently that wouldn't be Christianity, because I don't think. It depends how much you take seriously the evidence of the Gospels and the Hebrew Bible. Because
yeah,
I think
they'd still believe in the resurrection and all that.
But then it's like, yeah, you can believe that bit, but the bits where God knows everything, you like don't believe that. And so I think it's problematic. But this is the stuff that we can talk about when I come around to yours, mate.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like, there are open theists who could make some of the same arguments that you're making, or like kind of join forces with you against the non-open theists,
That's why they're open theists. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just at the end of it, they don't say, therefore atheism. They say, therefore open theism.
They say, therefore, some weird cobbled together version of Christianity that they can ad hoc rationalize based on the fact that an omniscient divine foreknowledge God doesn't make sense. Therefore, this God.
I'm not so, I don't know, trigger happy with the, it's all ad hoc. Oh, it's all like, I mean.
Well, it is. It is ad hoc by nation. Okay, ad hoc, mate, but it's reactive. Like open theism is a recent development precisely because of the problem that divine foreknowledge poses for an omnibenevolent God.
By the same token, all my beliefs are ad hoc because I started in a certain crude place, and then I would react to criticisms, and then I would change my beliefs as I go along. That's what you're supposed to do. So it's like, I don't.
But you are no longer a Christian.
But even as an atheist, like my worldview, I'm saying, is largely ad hoc in the sense that I, developed it in response to criticism and debate and so on. And it's like, so Christians aren't allowed to do that. Like, I think that like open theism, it might have come about as a result of puzzling over like, with divine foreknowledge and this is all problematic. But like, I think that it should be open to anyone to update your beliefs based on criticism of others and not necessarily throw out the whole thing. Because open theists are just trying to see if their basic worldview can be salvaged, like despite some details not working out. But I don't think that that's like irrational,
No, 100%, and I will concede that. But however, I think the tension exists in whether an open theist can call themselves a Christian given the evidence of the Bible. So it becomes, critics of open theism from within Christianity will say that it doesn't cohere with what the Bible says. So
I would think it's the other way around, though. I mean, what stories are incompatible with open theism?
Anyone that pertains to God's knowledge of being a closed book, all the omniscient arguments, as well as no, I won't, because that's not non-biblical. So the idea of prophecy. So if you're saying that prophecy is going to come to, and this will happen, then if that's going to happen, then open theism doesn't work. There are lots, and we can talk about that on your stream.
Is this whole conversation going to turn into me defending open theism?
It's going to be like, you're the Christian. You're like, yeah.
I would rather just get an open theist, because I'm not going to do it as well as they're going to, and I obviously at the end of the day don't really care as much as they do. But I mean, what I was thinking of are Bible stories where it's like God genuinely doesn't seem like he seems surprised by things. Like, he seems like that seems a lot more compatible with open theism.
Yeah, and so the idea that God doesn't know where Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, but then these are the anthropomorphic renderings of God as we see in the Hebrew Bible, before he gets abstracted to this ontological version that we see go through the Hebrew Bible and through the Gospels, and then eventually even more so to nowadays, where God is so abstract that he is this much more classical understanding of classical theism, which certainly, you're right, certainly wasn't the Hebrew Bible. I think the whole thing's an incoherent mess, because I think you can take elements of open theism that you can argue from, like some of the excerpts of like Adam and Eve, not God doesn't know where they are, therefore God doesn't know future 3D world events or whatever, but you can also argue the opposite, and that's the nature of the Bible, is you can go to two completely divergent views.
I should say though that, like, even though I think open theism is a legitimate option, and you seem to be arguing that it's not, like, even if you're successful in arguing against non-open theism, that's like a massive deal, because most people are not open theists. Like, most Christians are not open theists. So if you can make arguments against that conception of God in theism, then that's a very big deal. I mean, like, that's kind of important.
100%. So most theists will be classical theists, as in lay people. If you say, is God omni, they say, yeah, of course. And then, or like, this is why he's not. Okay, where do you go from here? Well, can you do open theism? Well, does this cause more problems? That's the next stage. So what we can probably do, I don't know if you're cool with this, Emerson, is we can do the book and talk about where that leaves you, and then say, okay, how tenable is open theism as a response to that? And can you be a Christian and an open theist?
Yeah, I mean, this process never ends. It's the thing. Like, but the thing is, you will start dealing with fewer and fewer people and smaller groups of Christians. Like, the kind of Christianity that I've kind of invented in my head of, like, this is like the strongest constructible version of Christianity. I don't know if anyone believes it. I don't know if there's a single person who actually adheres to my version of Christianity. Yeah,
that could exist.
That could exist.
But then is also, although it might be logically tenable in some sense, it's probabilistically not.
So, I mean, it's a lot more. I would have to be agnostic towards the kind of Christianity, but like I said, it's so far removed from what most people mean by Christian. Like, if I told my parents, "Oh, I'm a Christian now," and then I told them what I meant by that, they would be like, "No, you're still an atheist."
I believe in some idealistic mind, single absolute mind, and no, you lost us, mate. As Mitch has just said, and thank you so much, Mitch. Again, that's been up for several minutes now, and I haven't even recognised it. A reward for your pleasant inability to bring a stream to a close. Really have enjoyed this. Thanks. 17 minutes ago, I tried to end this show, and it's still going. So many times I wanted to chime in. I am listening via headphones while I do spring cleaning. Great stream, though, very thought-provoking. And Mitch adds in, of course, those damn iron chariots. So even if he doesn't know all future 3D world decisions, he can't defeat iron chariots. So that's a real problem. And Sabra Börswicht. For you, a seamless wrap up of the stream. Thank you. I am nothing if not professional, and do love a talk. So sorry, Emerson. I indulged. It's your fault, Emerson. You brought it up. I'm up for that, mate. Let's do it. In the meantime, thank you so much for your support, guys. Thank you, Sabra, for that, and Mitch for all of your support, and everyone else. Take care. All the best. Please subscribe to everything Emerson does. He's a great guy. As you have seen, Toodle pips for now, and I will see you on the other side. And check me out on Emerson's podcast at some point, maybe, if he's generous enough to fulfill that. Bye.